as we go along. But thank you to those of you that are here, and I'm thrilled that we're able to do this today, and I'm thrilled that we have Darnell Blackburn and Wendy Batiste-Johnson with us today to kind of help us navigate through this topic. And our leadership class this year, was suspended due to the COVID, and we had a couple of people that asked us to do a Zoom meeting on racism, and that was actually before the George Floyd murder actually happened. So, and that happened, and it's even been more exacerbated now. So, it's really a good topic. And I know that both Darnell and Wendy have a lot of really good information and personal experience to call on and share. So I really want to have this an open dialogue. We're all very good. We're all professionals, so I know that there will be respect. If you could just keep your microphones on mute unless you want to say something, that would be great. I think that Wendy and Darnell are going to start off by saying something, and then we really want this to be an open dialogue. And I'm hoping that at the end we have some actionable items that we can do to kind of be advocates in helping to remedy racism and going forward. So that being said, I was doing some research on my own, and because you hear all these words, you hear systemic racism, you hear Black Lives Matter, you hear all this, and I think a lot of people use those terms willy-nilly and don't know exactly what it means, and I certainly am not the expert in any of that. So I did just a little bit of education myself, and I just want to bring up a few things, and then I know Wendy and Darnell can certainly add to it. But I just want to say that what I learned is that as far as the disparities with Blacks and whites, Black men are stopped more by police than white men, obviously. They're 2.5 times more likely to get killed by police. Black men are 13% of the population, but are a quarter of the shooting victims by police. The statistics as far as wealth, employment, educational, criminal justice, housing, surveillance, and healthcare, all those big topic items, are all heavily skewed in the favor of white people. That's just the bottom line. That's how it is. The statistics back it up. Medium household income, poverty rates, everything, home loans, everything is skewed towards white people. And I was a little bit, I think, taken aback when I was reading that. I mean, I kind of think I knew it, but to see it, to see the statistics was a little bit, it was very, very strange to see that.
And link to it.
College completion, everything, just skewed towards us. And I think that the most important thing is before we can solve any problem, we have to understand it. So part of the understanding is educating ourselves. And so I just wanted to start out with that and trying to understand, and hopefully that's what we can work on today. So Darnell, did you want to start with some of your comments?
Typically it's ladies first, but
Oh,
Wendy told me I had to go first. No, well, she already told me I was gonna. So, yeah. All right. Hello, everybody. Give me a wave for those of you I can see. So hopefully everybody's good, healthy. I'm sure that everybody whose name I see is waving right now. I'm sure I can tell. I can see you wave. I can see it. I first appreciate you all just kind of tuning in for this. Karen came to me, and this is kind of in my wheelhouse because it's just what I do to some degree and extent. I wanted to just kind of have a dialogue. I was going to do a quick presentation and all that, but I don't need to. I think it's better if we just kind of talk. So I'm going to hit a couple perspectives. The one perspective is what I ask of you guys, and Wendy, correct me if I step out of line with any of this, but we talked ahead of time, and one thing that I would ask is, I want everybody just to think back to how you felt when you saw the George Floyd video. Just keep that in mind as we talk about this whole idea of race, and I like to call it race system, not racism, but race system, because racism is part of a systematic thing. It's a mindset with a lot of people. So as we talk about this whole idea of racism, just think about a race system, the whole idea and how you felt when you saw that video. Just keep it in mind. So that's one perspective. Another perspective I'm going to give is talk about the two hats that I wear. I'm black and blue. I may be a little blue from my son jumping on me and beating me up, but I'm black and blue because I'm a black man, and I'm a law enforcement, a former law enforcement officer, and I still work in law enforcement. So I have a really unique perspective about all of this stuff. So, and please do me a favor, Karen, keep me on 15 minutes. I want to make sure I don't go over, so keep me on that. So those perspectives I want to share. But before we jump into that, here's what I want you to do. How many of you all, if for those of you I can see, how many of you all have been through unconscious or implicit bias, some kind of training about that? Anybody? Okay, a couple people. Okay, good. So this idea of unconscious and implicit bias, I want to talk about those for a second. So unconscious bias and implicit bias are very interesting concepts. Unconscious biases, in a nutshell, is the idea of biases that we know that are in our subconscious that we don't necessarily realize we have. These unconscious biases, and they stem from your upbringing, from the world around you, the people you associate with. Those are the unconscious biases. And I look at implicit bias. The people think that they're interchangeable, but they're often not necessarily interchangeable, but one's a product of the other. Unconscious bias is a bias you have. Implicit bias is the action that you take based on your unconscious biases. So that's how it works with implicit bias. And people look at this whole thing of bias and they equate it with racism. That is not always the case. It's the start of racist or discriminatory behavior. So if you think about that as a system, you kind of understand it. I oftentimes talk to people and they say, I ask people, how many people think that they're prejudiced? And a lot of people in my circles, in the community circles, will say they won't raise their hand. And they confuse prejudice with racism again. The idea of being prejudiced is the idea that we all prejudge. We are human beings, so we instinctively prejudge people the way that they walk, the way they talk, the way they smell. If you get that close to them, So like, I'm glad John is on the screen right now. I'm sorry, I'm picking on John because I can't, because that's my buddy and I pick on him. But the way that they are, those are the things that we do. If they're Michigan fans, we judge them, But anyway, it's just what we do. So that's human nature. We judge people. The problem is that we don't always get it right. So that's the framework I want to work within. So here's what I want you guys to do for me. I'm real interactive, and so this is a challenge for me to present on the screen. But if you all do something for me, I want you just to think about what comes to your mind when I say these words. You can write it down if you want, or just think about it. All right, y'all ready? Everybody ready? Democrat, Republican, left, right, Catholic, Baptist, black, white, Detroit, Sterling Heights. So if you think about it, when we talk about this idea of bias, if we talk about Democrat, we formulate an opinion. We talk about Republicans, we formulate an opinion. We talk about the right, we formulate an opinion. We talk about the left. We categorize everything. People confuse this whole idea of bias with, again, often racism, but it's not always the case. The idea is that, again, it can be a precursor. The reason that it becomes a precursor is when we start to think that one is better than the other, it's okay to be proud of who you are or what you believe. It's okay to have a strong opinion about something. But when you start making a judgment about that thing and saying, because you are a part of this, that this is better than everything else, that's when we step into the line of our racist tendencies and behaviors. Does that make sense to you guys? So when you talk about bias, we have to think about the categorization of things and how we look at things. That's the whole idea of this unconscious and implicit bias. These unconscious biases permeate our mind, and then the implicit biases cause us to sometimes think that because we believe a certain thing that we're right and everybody else is wrong, or we're better and everybody else is not. So again, keeping that in mind as we talk about how you felt when you saw that video, just thinking about that. Again, the last other part of the perspective that I want to talk about is, being a Black man working in law enforcement. First off, it's not an easy task, because oftentimes as a Black man working in law enforcement, and particularly in my position, I walk in the room and I'm typically the only person that looks like me in a lot of rooms, in a lot of areas. And when you walk into the room, depending on your perspective, you wonder how many times somebody doesn't necessarily want you to be in that room. And it's sad that you have to think that way, but obviously with the things that are going on in the world today and the pervasive mentality, I mean, it shows you that those are some people's thoughts by the whole idea of separatism and division. Being a Black man working in law enforcement is also tough because you get it from all sides. You get ridiculed by the people in the Black community because they feel like you're working in an environment where you are oppressing people that look like you, people that come from your community, and you get the challenge of working in a predominantly white profession where, again, most people don't look like you and some don't necessarily think like you. It's all part of this whole system. So imagine this. Imagine somebody who just held their knee on somebody's neck for 8 minutes, almost 9 minutes, and you know that this was a horrible, disgusting act, and yet you may be assigned to go and protect this person's family because it's part of your job. Maybe because you're a police officer, you're sent there to protect or keep things from happening to this family. And you don't want things to happen, but imagine how that would feel for a Black officer when those things occur. You see those types of things. So there are a lot of challenges in this type of environment and being a part of this. So I wanted to kind of just talk about that. The idea that you find a system that is not necessarily one that a lot of people want to be involved in, but yet a lot of people want to criticize. And the critiques come from all different angles and all different places, So it really is a tough position to be in. One of the things that I do is, you guys see my little sign, I have an initiative that I run called Be the Change, which is an effort to recruit more diversity in law enforcement. It's an effort to recruit women, minorities, foreign-speaking people, get people in law enforcement so that the communities the police departments are reflective of the communities they serve. And it's tough right now because a lot of people don't want to do it. So I just wanted to kind of give you that framework. The other aspect, last thing, and I'll be good in terms of what I want to present to you guys today, is I'd ask that people understand, number one, I'm a Black man. Number two, I'm a father. Number three, I'm a son. Number four, I'm a child of God. And number five, I'm a law enforcement officer. So having to wear all those hats are a big challenge. People oftentimes don't understand the why we do things. some of us do things because of the experiences that we've had in our past. We want to make things better for other people. So I'd ask you, you know, as you look at these things that occur, is know the why, understand the why. One of the things that I want to talk about, and again, I'm almost done, I'm kind of random, I had some notes, but I want to just talk from my heart, is understanding this Black Lives Matter movement. I will be very transparent and honest with you guys. At first, I was not a fan of the Black Lives Matter movement in the initial stages of it, because I didn't understand the concept behind it. I didn't understand, you know, I was oblivious, quite honestly, because I'm thinking as a law enforcement officer that the majority of law enforcement officers are good. And I will stand by that. They are. But understanding that we do need to reform a system. When Karen just talked about all the statistics and how things are, we need to reform a system that is broken and busy or messed up. So understand this, that the Black Lives Matter movement doesn't mean that all lives don't matter. It doesn't mean that blue lives don't matter. It just means that we need to focus on where the problem is first, which is in the disparity of treatment of Black folks first, and then we can fix the country and move forward from there. So understanding that, and just, you know, if you got questions about it, asking, because we want to, again, make this more of a dialogue than us lecturing to you guys, and just kind of talking about some things. So I know that as a former law enforcement officer, still working in law enforcement, any questions, I'm excited about answering them and helping, especially with wearing both hats. So that would be my goal for today, is just to educate you guys and really to help to enlighten you, and ask that you will be open to receiving and asking questions and having a dialogue and presenting, but also being aware of the fact that we all have biases. We all do. The way to combat it is to recognize we have them first, and then make sure that any decisions we make aren't based on those biases, or if they are, then to check them and stop making them. So that's it for me for now, guys. Again, I want to answer any questions that you have, and we'll pose some questions to you guys as we proceed forward. But when you go first, you know, you get an advantage. The other person gets an advantage. So now Wendy can springboard off the stuff I said, because she made me first.
I just want to thank you, Darnell. You did a great job, and most of the people here know you because they're in the class with you. But Wendy, I didn't do a proper job of introducing you. So I know Wendy because she used to be the general manager over at Partridge Creek, and she's been gone from that job for a little while now, and has a whole bunch of other new initiatives going on, and she serves on many boards, and we're Facebook friends, and sometimes we disagree, but I still love her, and I think I've learned a ton from her, honestly, and I say that with the most respect and honesty, and I'm going to share some of the things later on. But Wendy was recently on Channel 4 News, because she had a really good personal dialogue about what it's like being the mother of Black children now, and the conversations that you have to have, especially with Black sons, that us parents of white children don't have to really think about. And it made me think a lot about the fact that I didn't have to have those conversations. So I thought Wendy would be a great person to have with us here today. So Wendy, it's all yours now.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen, for having me. Thank you, Darnell, for partnering with me, although you did go first. I promise I won't upstage you, I promise. But, you know, this is such a surreal time we're living in. Coronavirus, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic. What I have said to describe this time is that we're living in a pandemic within a pandemic. And I often say to my white friends that I wish that COVID was our only concern as a Black woman, as a Black wife, as a Black mother. And COVID is clearly disparaging the Black community in large numbers. And that is something that I believe is not being spoken of as often as it should be. And you talk about systemic racism. Well, healthcare is a huge component of that systemic racism that impacts the Black and brown communities. And when we say Black and brown, I'm also including the Hispanic communities as well, because they are as well disproportionately impacted by COVID. And the theories that are going around, the conspiracy theories about why that is it's painful for African Americans to hear, when we know the reality of the situation is because the healthcare system has essentially failed us as a community. And so, and I sit on a healthcare board. So, you know, I advocate for better healthcare practices, and I know that the healthcare systems are doing the same, but there are broken systems that unfortunately need to be reformed so that they service all Americans, no matter what color you are. There is a quote that I would love to read to you guys that I would love to hear your opinion of at the end of my presentation. And Karen, you might have seen this because I posted it, but this quote really resonated to me. The quote is, "Opinion is really the lowest form of human knowledge. It requires no accountability, no understanding. The highest form of knowledge is empathy, for it requires us to suspend our egos and live in another's world. It requires profound purpose larger than the self kind of understanding." And that quote I ran across a few days ago, and it has just sat on my heart, very heavy on my heart, because I believe that a great deal of why we as Americans are struggling with the race system, as Darnell mentioned it, is because we are lacking empathy. We are not suspending ourselves from our own realities and taking a moment to understand someone else's. And acknowledgement is key. So the first step is acknowledging that there is a systemic problem in our country. And it is one that has been happening for a very long time. And honestly, you know, I was just talking about the story of Ruby Bridges, who, by the way, is still alive. She's 65 years old. And if you don't know Ruby Bridges, she was a young African-American girl who was escorted into school by armed police officers and guards, because there were people who did not want her to segregate their schools and go to school with the white kids. She is 65 years old. She is still living. So to say that, oh, that happened so long ago, is just not factual. This is something that is fresh. I mean, my father is that age. So this is something that is fresh. So I'm certain that if you speak with your parents, your grandparents, if they're alive, and really ask them about the experiences they've witnessed, then maybe those realities will allow for more empathy in our current world. Because I do believe that with the election of President Obama, everyone thought race relations were solved. Well, that was not the case at all. I mean, let me tell you, I for one, as a Black woman, was so proud to see this country elect a Black man. So proud. I have a 99-year-old aunt who's still living. She thought she'd never see this day. She had tears in her eyes. That was profound. That was powerful. But that was not the answer. Taking Aunt Jemima off of your syrup logo is not the answer. Taking Uncle Ben off the rice box is not the answer. We need true reform. We need true practices of law that will benefit us as a whole. And, you know, someone gave this analogy, which I thought was quite profound, because I have been using social media as a vehicle. And maybe it's because I do feel, and I use the term unmuzzled. I know that's an unflattering term for most, but for me, being a Black woman in a corporate environment, you know, we are always very cautious of what we say and how we say it. And I'm sure Darnell, as a Black man in the corporate environment, can attest to this, because there are these microaggressions in the workplace because we're often the only one that are among our counterparts who are not Black. And so now that I am, in a more entrepreneurial space, and I am sharing my stories, what I am discovering is that a great deal of my friends, and I am very blessed, I have a colorful hue of friends. I'm very blessed with that because that's just how I was raised. I was raised in the South, believe it or not. And, my parents moved here when I was 8 years old, but I would always go back and forth. So I had sort of a Louisiana upbringing and a Michigan upbringing, and then I went to school out east in New York. So I feel like I've just had a very broad spectrum of the opportunity to meet different people. And as a result of that, I have a large spectrum of friends. And what I'm finding, though, just even with my white friends, that I might be their only Black friend. And so, there's a statistic that said that 40% of white Americans don't have a non-white friend, whereas 25% of non-white Americans don't have a friend outside, of their comfort zone. And so, of race, that is. And I feel that we need to be talking to each other. Conversations need to be had. As I'm sharing my stories, I'm hearing, I had no idea. I didn't know that, Wendy. I had no idea that happened to you, as if I were an outlier, because we work together, because our kids go to school together, because we go to the same church, or because I live in a certain neighborhood. That has no bearing. I still wear this skin. And let me tell you, my pedigree is not written all over my face before I'm stopped by a police officer or before someone, treats me differently in a grocery store, which, by the way, has happened to me. And I've had experiences. I've had unfortunate experiences where I was in a fearful situation with a police officer. I was with my son at the time, who was a toddler. It was terrifying. I was by myself, and I was on the freeway, and I got stopped for no other reason outside of the fact that he wanted to make sure that the car I was driving was mine, because I guess it was too fancy for me to be driving. And the only questions he wanted to ask me about was where I got my car, how much it cost. I mean, these are the questions coming from the officer. Had nothing to do with any violation that had happened to me. So I was terrified. And thankfully, I was able to exit that situation safely with my son. But these are situations that happen to all of us. It does not matter. I went to, we talk about the bird watcher in New York City, and they talked about how he went to Harvard, I believe. His pedigree didn't stop what happened to him either. It's just what it is. So what I have been challenging my friends to do is to lean on me for questions, but I've been empowering them to seek their own knowledge, because history has shown that we are not taught the accurate history in schools. So the education my children embody about our Black history, unfortunately, have come from my husband and I, and my 99-year-old aunt, who's telling firsthand experiences, and their grandparents, and us exposing them to certain literature. These are not books that they're exposed to at their school. So the first line of advice I would give to all of you is to grab some books by Black authors. Educate yourself on someone else's experience, because you might be surprised. I just posted the other day, Mississippi has decided to remove the Confederate symbol from their state flag, which, by the way, is long overdue. And I posted the other day, and I'm sure you saw this too, Karen, that all I know about the state of Mississippi, which is sad, is that when I was a child, we do annual road trips to Louisiana, because that's where the majority of my mother's side of the family was. And it was known to myself and my siblings that we were never to sleep over, stop for food, stop for bathroom breaks in the state of Mississippi. We were to do this in the neighboring states prior to entering, so that once we got into the state of Mississippi, we would drive straight through without having to stop. Because that is the fear that my parents had about that state. When I posted that, there were countless other African-American women and men who said, that is my experience as well. My white friends were in disbelief, as they should be, because there should never be a state, we are free, right? We're all free. There should never be a state in this United States of America where my Black skin should feel criminalized, victimized, or targeted. But this is our reality. And we all have been muzzled for years, because the stigma as well has been, oh, you're playing the race card. You know, when you bring up race, you're playing the race card. Let's not talk about race. When in fact, it may just be about race. And it's okay. We're in 2020. If we can't talk about race face to face and have a respectful conversation amongst each other, then we're failing our children. I want my children to be able to drive through the state of Mississippi without having to worry about getting targeted. I really want that day to happen. Like I really want that day to happen. I want my children, I don't want my children to have these same conversations with their children that I am painfully having to have with them. I have a 14-year-old son. It's very difficult for me and my husband as well, who has also had horrific interactions with law enforcement. And my husband is a University of Michigan graduate who has his MBA from Wayne State University, who is probably the biggest teddy bear you'll ever meet. He is the most loving person ever. And even he has been targeted. It happens to all of us. And I know that there is a way for us to move forward, but we have to acknowledge that this is happening. We all do, as a collective Americans, not just Black Americans and acknowledging it, not just white Americans, but all of us. And then we have to also want to move forward. I said to my good girlfriend, who happens to be white, I said, gosh, this has got to be exhausting for you too, because she is an amazing human being. And she supports me and my family. I support her and her family. And we just want to live as Americans. You know, we just want to have a normal life. And so when these things happen, she feels accountable, you know, because she's white, she's privileged. And so she's just like, what can I do? And I tell her, you keep doing what you're doing. And that's speaking up when you know something is wrong. Don't allow someone to say, even if I'm not there, don't allow someone to disparage anyone, even if, you know, they're gay, even Hispanic, Asian, you know, with the coronavirus, how Asians are being targeted. Justice needs to be fought for all, not just us, but for all. And so I guess that's the message I want to share to the group, is that we all have an opportunity to have a voice. My mother always told me growing up, a closed mouth doesn't get fed. That was her famous phrase. And I guess that's resonated with me, because Karen will tell you, I don't close my mouth. And so, you know, I just want everyone else to also feel empowered and feel supported, that they can open their mouth. Like, we need you. We need allies. We absolutely need allies in this fight, because we can't do this alone. So I think that's about it for me.
Hey, Karen, can I jump in for 1 second?
Absolutely.
Just she triggers something, Wendy, and I don't know, like that conversation about Mississippi was told to me about how growing up. So it's not even, I don't know if you knew that too, but it's not even.
Oh yeah, I did.
It was told to me, you don't stop in how. That was ingrained in my mind, you know, and I went to Michigan State, took 96 back and forth for years. You don't stop in how. So just to I want to just jump in and piggyback with that, because it's not just Mississippi. We're talking Michigan and the things that have been ingrained into our minds and things we dealt with.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, I went to, as I mentioned to you earlier when we were speaking, I went to high school in a suburb of Michigan, and I was on the track team, and we had a track meet in Pinckney, Michigan. And my coach, a white man who was amazing, Mr. Dunn, there were 3 Black girls on the track team. He pulled us aside. He said, "Stay close to me." You have to think about psychologically what that does to young Black children, to know that there are present dangers that are unjustified. And so my children are going through it, unfortunately. You know, this time cannot be hid from them. I encourage people to be as transparent with their children as possible. When I did the WDIV interview, I implored white parents to also have conversations with their children, because it's just as important for their children to be aware as it is for mine. And also what it means to have a Black friend, and then to encourage that type of diversity. I like I said, I really take great pride in the fact that I have a diverse, beautiful array of friendships. And I think that that is reflective for my children, so they know that that's what they want for themselves as well. And so, you know, we have a ways to go. I mean, this is not going to happen overnight, but I do believe that if this is an opportunity, you know, everyone says, is this different? I want to believe so. We all want to believe so, right? We all want to believe that this time is different so that we can capitalize on it and make it better for our children. Because at the end of the day, they deserve better. You know, we're adults. We're fighting our fights, and, you know, we are most understanding of what's happening, but our children deserve better, and their children deserve better. So we need to keep that in mind for every decision we're making moving forward.
Thank you, Wendy. Great job. And I do want to open this up to questions, but before we do that, I just want to, maybe if I can clarify, and Darnell, you touched a little bit on it, the whole Black Lives Matter, and I was guilty of this myself just recently, but, you know, I see Black Lives Matter and I don't think all lives matter, right? And I know that invades most people. And until recently, I understood that that's unmissable. And I saw a post on Facebook where somebody that I used to respond to, not anymore, said that a company that posted that they support Black Lives Matter, she wouldn't be supporting them anymore because they came and said that they were in support of Black Lives Matter movement. And she said she went on to say that Black Lives Matter, BLM should stand for Babies Lives Matter, and all the babies that are being aborted, blah, 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 and that. And I couldn't believe the tone and the message in her post. And it got me thinking that, okay, I get it. It's not saying that one life is more important than another. It's just saying that the Black life is collectively and individually is as important as every other life, collectively and individually. So it's not that the other lives aren't important. It's just that we have to acknowledge that there is and has been disparity for a for a long time. And we have to work to rectify it. So I think I finally get it, Wendy, I think. So
you got it.
But then on the other hand, you know, some of the and I guess it's all about education too, is some of the things that you're seeing about Black Lives Matter, and, you know, the taking down of the statues and the tiling of the churches and stuff like that. That's not particularly that group, is it? And what is the difference between what's going on there and people attributing it to Black Lives Matter? Can either of you talk to that?
You can go first, Darnell. Go for it.
Just real briefly, that may be a part of the push from the movement, but those are political things that I think they're more politicized than anything. I'm gonna be completely honest. This is me, not Wendy, but I could care less about a statue coming down. I could care less about you changing Aunt Jemima. I care about you changing your mindset. So I don't care. For me, it's absolutely ridiculous. Spend money to somehow teach the fact that police officers in the United States were established to be slave catchers in the beginning, that most people don't understand. Teach that in school. Spend the money there. Don't take a statue down. So that's more of a political thing, maybe from the push, but to me, that's just appeasing people. That's for me personally.
I agree with you. I do think that Black Lives Matter is not political. Black Lives Matter is just that. Our lives matter. And if you restate those statistics you did at the beginning, that can emphasize why our lives matter. Someone gave me an analogy. I read it on Facebook about, if a house was on fire on a block and the fireman comes and says, okay, I'm going to put this fire out. And then someone else says, but what about my house? And he says, well, your house isn't on fire. Yeah, but I want you to take care of my house too. And he says, but this house needs me now. That's how, I guess that's the better analogy of how to describe Black Lives Matter. Black lives we need the collective now. We need the help. We're the house burning. We need the attention. Doesn't mean that the other homes on the block don't matter. It just means that our house is burning right now. And that's where the attention needs to be directed. And to be honest with you, I stopped explaining it because I believe, and Karen, I appreciate your assessment because I know that you have the best intentions, but for a large percentage of people, I believe they understand it. I do. I believe they just refuse to acknowledge it. Again, if you have to, it's like AA. You have to acknowledge you have a problem first. If you're not going to acknowledge that a problem exists, you're never going to get to the other side of it. So until people are able to acknowledge it, there's not a conversation to be had because then you're wasting your breath. And I'm about currently preserving my energy for the people that need it the most, those Black lives in my family. I have a Black father, a Black brother, a Black son, and a Black husband. They need me, and I need to ensure that I'm preserving my energy to support them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And hey, Alvin, I know you've joined and you've been posting a couple questions. Are you able to ask them directly, or I don't know if you can hear me. Darnell, can you read some of the comments from Alvin?
Yeah.
I can read them.
Okay, Alvin's in our class this year, Wendy. So
You want me to read the question? You want me to read the question out loud? Okay, Alvin says that's not what we're hearing from the media. Media is stating that it's political movement and anarchists. So one of my concerns is that being raised is the trend among organizations to hire a token diversity officer with no interest in bringing about real change. We all have a love-hate relationship with the media, don't we? So I can't speak to what the media is reporting because, again, I don't know what media outlet you're watching, because I can guarantee you Fox is reporting something completely different than CNN. What I will say is that I was proud to bring my children to a local protest here in Michigan. So proud. It was peaceful. It was loving. It was caring. It was empathetic. It was what they needed to bear witness to. I know there have been a few bad apples who have tried to hijack these peaceful protests for the sake of media, to be quite honest with you. They want to be on the front headlines. It's always those. It's, hey, look at me. I'm proud of the fact that the majority of these protests have been peaceful. As it pertains to the monuments, I have a very conflicted view on them. I personally don't believe that we should have monuments up of slave owners who raped my ancestors and beat them, and they should be in center stage in a downtown circle for everyone to come and view. I personally think we should be emulating people who have fought for our country, who have fought for justice, who Like even, you know, you want to talk about politics, let's talk about John McCain, who's a Republican, who clearly is a war hero. I'd like to see a monument of him, you know? I'd like to see, you know, monuments of other Black activists who, you know, we talk about Harriet Tubman is supposed to be in a $20 bill. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see people who have fought for our rights to be where we are today, because we have come a long way. And I do think it's warranted for us to acknowledge that as well. There are many people that died for us to get to where we are today. I'd like to see monuments of those individuals. We don't want monuments of traitors who fought against this country and what it stood for. So I don't believe they should be torn down in the manner that they are. I'm not an advocate for violence at all. But I do believe that this hopefully is going to open up thoughtful conversation about changes like what we saw happen in Mississippi. So hopefully people will stop with the violence, and then they can have thoughtful conversation to not just remove them, but replace them with figures that we all can share in the glory of.
Luke, why don't you go ahead with your concern about the state of tolerance or the lack of?
Yeah, so a couple of quick observations, and then it might open up some more dialogue. First of all, when I speak of Black Lives Matter, I think there is a distinction between those who believe in the cause of Black Lives Matter and a couple of organizations who have labeled themselves the Organization of Black Lives Matter. There are some groups that call themselves, there's one specifically that calls themselves the Black Lives Matter group. Their leadership is very intolerant of most every position other than their own. Darnell, you spoke about everyone's allowed to believe what they want to believe and say what they want to say, assuming that, and it should be, polite, respectful, compassionate, caring, and tolerant. My concerns are that the message that's out there from a lot of people is of zero tolerance. If I support law enforcement, there are people who have told people on social media, they're saying, then you can't support Black Lives Matter. I believe that is just an absurd concept. So, you know, I think that there's just a lack of tolerance coming from every side in this issue, this topic, this debate.
So, and I know Darnell is going to really hone in on this because this is his territory, but before you do, I just want to say something. This is where your own personal knowledge has to supersede what you're seeing and hearing on the media and or in circles that may also not understand. I personally have not heard of two different Black Lives Matter groups. You may be accurate, but I personally have not. I know that the Black Lives Matter group was formulated as a result of what happened with Trayvon Martin and specifically what happened in St. Louis. And I'm so sorry, the young boy's name escapes me. Darnell, if you could back me up, I can't recall at the moment. Michael Brown, yes. And so I know that is what spearheaded the Black Lives Movement, because these were two minors whose lives were taken unjustifiably. And also their murderers were let loose. They were not held lawfully to the crime. And the African-American community, myself included, didn't feel that it was warranted that they were released. I think that everything today is about sensationalism. I think that everyone wants to sensationalize everything for attention. And it's really unfortunate, because I do believe that if the core facts were given, then we would cut out so much of this confusion. But the fact of the matter is that, and this has nothing to do with politics, but when we do have a leader who's tweeting out white power, it doesn't help. It just doesn't help. So I encourage you. The only thing I don't have the answer to make you feel better about that, But what I will encourage you to do is to pick up some books about the Black Lives Matter movement, because there are some out there. And I don't have them with me, but Karen, after this is over, I'd be happy to send links to a few books that I believe are just great reads for everyone to understand why this movement even was spearheaded. And it's certainly, and here's the thing, a great majority of Black people have police officers in their families. And so we can't be anti-blue. And I don't want to pick a side either. I have police officers in my family. I don't want to pick sides. I just want there to be a mutual level of respect between both sides. And that, I believe, is what's lost. And so that's where reform needs to happen. I don't have the answer for how that happens. That's more Darnell's specialty. But I will say that we do need to improve on the communications between the Black and brown communities and law enforcement, so that we can start bridging that gap, so that we don't feel like we have to choose sides.
Luke, just I'll jump in and just quickly. I mean, Wendy answered it perfectly. The idea is that there'll always be saboteurs. There'll be saboteurs to on both sides. And the reality is that the movement was established for the reasons she said, for those right reasons. And there will always be people that will try to, for no other term, bastardize something and sabotage. You had an antagonists that would pretend to be protesters in some instances and start looting and rioting. Then you have police officers, some police officers who intentionally do things. I mean, it's just, there'll be saboteurs. The reality is the movement was started for the reason to just make Black Lives matter and to recognize the injustices and the ills. And I want to, jump in just really quickly. Alvin asked a question about hiring token diversity officers. And I don't think we answered it as much, that part of it. But Alvin, if I could answer that, the reality is this, that if there's, I say this oftentimes because, and Wendy and I talked about this, a Black police officer does not try to work in the suburbs most times. Most of the Black police officers I know work in the city of Detroit. And that's because they know about having to come out here and work in these areas. They feel like they'll have to experience being the only Black working at a department, which is not a rarity, an anomaly. They feel like they have to deal with maybe some discriminatory practices from the white officers. They have to deal with the community. They got to deal with all these things. And so I'm going to bring this into that question about hiring a token diversity officer. The reality is that hiring somebody, a token diversity officer, to hire more Blacks or minorities or whatever, the reality is that nobody should be hired unless they're qualified. None of us are ever saying that. I'm not implying that you are either, Alvin. But the thing I want you to understand is that if there's never a first, or only, there'll never be a first, and if there's never a first, there'll never be more. So with that being said, even if they hire a token diversity, if people don't really want diversity and they just hire somebody because they say they want diversity, somehow they'll still get diversity eventually. So let it happen. That's what I want to happen. So I wanted to address that as well and move on to whatever else ever question. So next question.
Who's got the next question? Anybody? Chelsea, would you like to, I don't know if it's, I hate to put you on the spot, but would you like to talk at all about what was going on in Shelby Township a couple weeks ago with a couple little incidents you guys had there?
Only if anybody wants me to talk about it. I'm sure everybody's aware of what happened. I don't know if there's anybody that's on here that isn't aware of what happened. It's a difficult topic for me, just given the fact that I personally know him both through work and outside of work.
I'm aware. Can you share a little background? Maybe I do. Maybe I know, but I'm not sure I know. So if you could give me a little.
I work for Shelby Township, Michigan. Our police chief was just recently in the spotlight for some tweets that he shared on a private account It was one that he was operating not as a police chief, but as a civilian. But he was also using a different name. So it was being hidden, but not being hidden. Our police department had kind of interacted with him on the account, so they were aware that he had the account. It's really hit or miss as to how someone could personally view it. There's the side of saying that the comments that he made were racist, but then there's also the side that's saying that he wasn't attacking a race as a whole, but rather a group of people that were breaking the law. So there's a fine line between where someone can say they feel given the situation, and it's all just in how you interpret the way that he was interpreting something in a matter like social media, where it's hard to tell what people are saying in the context they're saying and how they're saying it. But like I said, I know him personally. I would have never guessed that this is something that he would have done. So it was difficult for me to deal with both professionally and personally. The things that he said, the way that he went about it, are not reflective of the views of our police department as a whole. They're not reflected as the views of our township, our board, our residents. So it's been really difficult to deal with. I don't know if anyone wants me to elaborate further.
It was, Wendy, it got quite a bit of coverage, and I know there was a couple other people that said they hadn't heard about it, but there were a lot of protests and people wanted him to lose his job, and it ended up being, after a lot of public commentary, it ended up with him getting a 30-day suspension with pay?
Yeah, so the event happened, I want to say the first week of June. He was put on administrative leave with pay pending investigation. We didn't have a board meeting, I think, until the 16th. So it went for about 2 weeks that he was under investigation. The board voted 5-2 to keep him. So he is being put on a 30-day suspension, non-paid. He will be required to go through training before he's brought back. And then I do believe they are going to reevaluate it again after his 30-day suspension, but the reevaluation won't have any determination as to whether he has his job because the board's already voted for that. But it was a 5-2 vote, so there were 2 board members that did vote for him to be terminated.
So I'm curious, is there any diversity on that board?
There is not.
Exactly.
There's 2 females and 5 males, but there's no racial diversity.
Exactly. And so hence the problem. So everyone in Shelby Township who is now Black and brown, who knows that the chief, is that who it was?
Yep,
the
our
chief,
police chief
has said these inflammatory things about a specific group that I'm assuming is Black, is now going to feel like they can't trust the police department.
Right.
This is the problem. This is the temperature that doesn't need to exist. So he's the leader. He sets the tone. So you just talked about interpretations. Well, you clearly, didn't, maybe you might interpret it that he made a slip up and, that it won't impact you. But think about the other officers who are already tinkering because and they hear him say that.
Right.
What does that empower them to do the next time they pull over a Black kid who just got his license and maybe, is having, picked up his friend, pumps up his music and just wants to have fun? This is the problem. So these are, personally, I don't have the solution. I didn't hear exactly what he said. I'll look it up when we get off this call, and I'll share with my comments with Karen separately, and maybe she could share it with you guys later. But I will say that we don't have room for this. And I think also, and I say this with all respect, it is a privilege for you to say that you know him personally and you never would have expected him to say that. That is a privilege because he would have never said that to you.
Right. Absolutely.
So it's just a really sticky situation. And I don't envy the position you're put in, because this is someone I could tell you clearly respected, who has probably personally and professionally disappointed you. But this training is not going to fix this implicit bias. You know, it just isn't. And that's my opinion. Darnell can chime in on his thoughts on that. I'm sure he knows more about the situation, but this is indeed a problem. It's a problem because he sets the tone, and the tone has now been set. And 30-day suspension is not an appropriate tone that's going to prevent another officer from acting off of his words.
Absolutely.
And,
So
and
if
Chelsea, I apologize. I don't mean to put Chelsea on the hot seat. It's not you, but it's the current situation. You know, that's a great example. And, you know, we as a nonprofit leader, we're always said, you know, we always have to work on our boards. Those of you that are nonprofit leaders, you know that it's all about getting diversity in your boards. And, you know, so it's not like we have to pick people from different ethnic backgrounds or whatever just to be on our board. We want to pick people that are really representative of what our mission is too. So I think that's really important too, and that's something that we have to really do a better job of. And even, you know, and more, I think more close to my heart is Macomb County. You look at Macomb County, you look at the leadership in Macomb County. Is it representative of the county we're serving? Not at all. Not at all. Who's going to do something about that? Who's going to do something? We've got to have people that are willing to step up to the plate, that are willing to run for office, that are willing to get involved in leadership roles, because they're not just going to be picked and they're going to say, hey, Darnell, you're going to be, you know, in charge of this, or Wendy, you're going to be in charge of that. It's got to be people that want to get involved, and then it's up to the population to vote for them and to, you know, to have a bigger voice. But thank you, Chelsea, and thank you, Wendy. That was
I did just share his name and the Detroit Free Press article, which is the first one that pops up if you Google him. They do link to some of the other ones. There's multiple articles out there if anybody did want to dig into it a little bit deeper.
Thank you. Yes, Erin.
I think, speaking of social media and everything that's been out there, I think to your comments about the police chief, there are so many people that I think are using social media to say things that they would never say if they were face to face with someone. In a lot of ways, I've kind of stayed off of social media. I don't follow tweets. I don't do that because I can't constantly be on that. Also, I've been kind of editing what my kids are seeing on like news coverage. And I think the biggest distress for me is what is being said about our country as a whole, because I come from a family of immigrants. Our experience is that the United States was a place of opportunity, and that is what my family on both sides has always tried to impress on us and on our children as they've grown. My grandparents came from Nazi Germany, and my mother didn't speak English when she started school. And she was really picked on. She was called a little Nazi. She was beat up as a kid. And so, I mean, even though we're, you know, blonde-haired white kids, she had some prejudice and discrimination against her as a child. And I think that really resonated with her. She always wanted to say, you know, I'm not German, I'm not this, I'm American. And I have parents that walked in civil rights marches in the 60s. They have always tried to impress on us that God loves everyone equally and everyone is special and beautiful. And it really bothers me that that what my kids are seeing on the news is that this country is a horribly flawed, awful place. In some ways, I'm not saying that they don't have issues and that there aren't things that we have to overcome. But at the same time, there are wonderful things about this country, wonderful things about law enforcement, wonderful things about business and opportunity here. And I don't want my kids to see this view of the United States as being a fundamentally horrible, flawed place. So I think that's part of what people are reacting to right now. I don't know why it has to be one or the other.
Can I respond, Aaron?
Absolutely.
I appreciate your heart, truly. And I say this and I'll continue to say it: love begets love. Fear begets, or hate begets hate. Fear begets fear, but love begets love. And the reality is that what you're saying is that, you know, you were raised a certain way. You were raised and you were taught these things, that this is a good place, that there are good things, even with bad experiences. And I don't think, you know, I don't know about anybody else Black, but I'm not trying to go to Africa. I'm not trying to go to Asia. I'm not trying to go anywhere else. This is a good country, but it can be better. And
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that's what we're saying. And God loves everybody, but people don't. And the reality is that people don't love people just because of the color of their skin and their background, just as your grandmother had to endure the things she had to endure. And I think it's the principles that are still underlying in this country. Again, you know, I don't want to, I say this because I just want people to be educated. Some people did not know, again, policing was established. They were slave catchers. It's a creed and oath that was established that way. And a lot of people don't know that. I didn't become a police officer so I can enslave or abuse my people or anybody else. I became a police officer because I experienced drug addicts trauma. I experienced death trauma. I wanted to make the world better for other people. So it's unfortunate that you know, this is the way that it is, but we're not saying that it's bad. We're just saying let's address the fundamental ills that are underlying, that are now rising to the surface, and teaching your kids. You know, if I could give you anything, teach them that, hey, there are certain groups of, again, like I said, it's good to be proud of who you are. It's good to be proud of where you're from. It's good to be proud of your family lineage, but don't look down on other people. And the thing that you teach them is that you teach them that, hey, we love each other and have these relationships with one another. But unfortunately, not everybody thinks like that. So you can be the change, and you can be the one to break through those barriers. So it's disheartening on every level. It's disheartening for me to have to explain to my sons and my kids and say, listen, man, if you get stopped by the police, you comply now so you can complain later, even if it's unjust and unmerited. And it's disheartening for me to know that some officers write people tickets because they know they can't take care of those tickets. Yeah, everybody should have a license. Yeah, but everybody comes from different socioeconomic statuses and backgrounds. It's disheartening. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to fix it, and fix it at my level. You can fix it at your level by teaching your kids. Continue to be loving, continue to be understanding, and know that these fundamental things do exist, but it's still a great place to live and be, if that helps or makes sense, you know? So I just encourage you, you know, you don't completely shun them, because if they're shunned, they don't know. And I know you want to keep things good for them, but the world we live in is full of challenges and all that. So I mean, just encourage them to be who they are, and continue to love people for who they are, and continue to be the change and be better in this world.
Go ahead. I agree. I just want to second that. I think that it is, I think we have to acknowledge that we live in a flawed country. I do think that we have to acknowledge it. If it weren't so flawed, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. There wouldn't be Black bodies being lynched on national television for all of our children to witness. That was a lynching. We witnessed a Black man be killed in front of all of us. And that is not what this country should be about. And as unfortunate as it is that all of our children are having to witness this, you know, I think about the fact that, you know, I live in a suburb of Detroit. I am one of 2 Black families on my street. And my children witness their other peers who are not Black freely roam this suburban city because it's a privilege for them to do so because of the color of their skin, simply put. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it, and we must acknowledge that. And my husband and I, and the other African-American family on this block, have to always live in this unjustifiable fear that if we allow our Black children to roam just as freely as their white friends on our street, in the climate that we're in, doesn't matter how safe you think your area is, we're just literally living every day to pray that they come home safely. I'll give you an example. I live in Bloomfield Hills, affluent suburb of Detroit. Last year, my family and I decided to all buy bikes so we can go bike riding as a family. It was going to be our summer exercise. We were riding bikes and we decided to stop by the local Kroger to grab drinks because someone had forgotten their water bottle. As we were leaving the Kroger parking lot, there were a group of white males in a truck who yelled the N-word while my children were with me. My son was 13, my daughter was 9. That's a conversation we had to go home and have instead of just go home and be in glee from what should have been a beautiful Black bike ride. So I completely empathize with the America you want your children to believe we live in, but I'm here to tell you that I don't have the privilege to allow my kids to believe that in that America, not yet at least, because of situations like that in 2020. Well, this was 2019, but we shouldn't be here. We should not be here. I'll give you another example, because I do believe you guys have to hear these stories to know that this is not just in our mind. This is happening. My husband and I, we bought this home maybe like 7 years ago. We gutted it to the studs and renovated it because it was an older home. Put a substantial amount of our savings into the renovations. It's a beautiful home. We even upgraded it, added some square footage. We recently wanted to get it appraised because we were going to refi, or we even have contemplated moving. That's a story for another day. But we decided to go have an appraisal. The appraiser came to our home, and we were here at the time. My kids were outside playing. When we got the appraisal back, the amount that they gave us was like $200,000 less than what we purchased it for 7 years ago. I'm in Bloomfield Hills. I just want you guys to keep that in mind. And I mean, this is private business, but our upgrades were north of $200,000. I just want to tell you that, okay? So, of course, we've been down this road before, so I want you to know this is not new for my family. Whenever we're purchasing a home, I'm sure Darnell can attest to this. We called our bank, who we love, and they've known us for years, and we said, this is preposterous. I was like, you could even go Google my house and get a base rate, and this is beyond that, or far below that. So after having to argue my way for a second appraisal at their cost, we got the appraisal back today. And but let me tell you what we did the second time. We had our realtor, who's a white woman, walk the house with the appraiser. And guess what? We got the accurate number. And it was $400,000 more than what had originally been. This is my private personal business, but I'm letting you know this because this is real. We are living this every single day. I mean, it makes me emotional just to even, why should we have to go through these hurdles? Why? And so I want my children to love this country too. They were born here. This is their country. Their ancestors built this country. I want them to love this country, but I'm having a hard time loving this country right now. So we just want you and everyone else to empathize with what we have to get through to get to where you guys are right now. And that's all we ask. That's it.
Thank you, Wendy, for sharing that. I mean, it's these kind of stories that we need to hear. Otherwise, we don't know. We have no idea what's going on.
As a banker, that really bothered me. That shouldn't happen to you.
No. Yeah, right. But if it's happening to, Wendy in an affluent suburb, you just think what's going on like in Detroit and, yeah. But the more we know, the more we can, the less likely we are to pretend we don't know, or, it's knowledge is power. Got to share those stories. Julie, are there any other comments or questions that we need to address? I think Julie hears me.
I don't think so right now, Karen.
I haven't been watching the comments, so I'm not sure if there was anything.
One of the last things Alvin said was that he was with a group of clergy men and women, and just this was a few minutes ago now, but just some of the experiences that they had, the same thing, being pulled over more than 20 times while driving places outside of Detroit, but never within the city of Detroit. And then he also said that he heard just because a man is polite and friendly with every woman doesn't mean that he's not coming back home and abusing the women that lives with him. So I think his point is just, correct me if I'm wrong, Alvin, but that this is happening more and more, just like Wendy was sharing, it's happening all the time. And the more that you share these stories with others and just inform them, like Karen said, and you guys have been saying, Darnell and Wendy, that's the information and the knowledge that we need.
I think that may have been a response to the Shelby Township conversation as well.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thanks, Chelsea.
Okay. There are also, and I'm sure that Wendy and Darnell probably are way more versed in this than I am, but I know there are some companies that do a way better job at trying to be better and at making America better. One of them is Ben & Jerry's. If you go to their website, they have a lot of things about Black Lives Matter and what they're doing. And I watched some really good videos on there earlier today. So I know they're one of the companies that actually puts their money where their mouth is and is trying to make a positive difference. And I'm sure there's probably many others, probably not enough, but a few others that are doing that as well. Do we are there any other questions or comments anybody would like to make?
Karen, this is Diane.
Hi,
Sorry.
Diane.
Hi, Darnell and Wendy. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective and insights. Sorry I'm not on camera. I have a lot going around me right now, but I just wanted to ask both of you if you wanted to share your thoughts. If we collectively as community leaders came together and said, we acknowledge the inequity and injustice, and you don't have to exhaustively have these same conversations over and over, what conversation would you like to see happen next to be part of the solution?
Great question.
It is an awesome question. I think I can speak to the reform for if I could, Diane. I don't know if this is the lane, but I've thought a lot about, because it's my wheelhouse, police reform, and from that perspective, I'd like to see. I mean, companies not get behind political things, but get behind the idea. Like, there's so many there. Really quickly, there's standards for policing. Like, I'll give you this: once you become a police officer, if you stay with an agency for 25 years, you don't have to go through any psychological evaluation again, unless something major happens, unless you're, and even with that, I didn't hear Chelsea say, no, nothing against Chelsea, didn't hear them say that they're going to make the chief go through a psychological evaluation to determine what, where is his mind or his mindset. And I know Bob too, and that's something that's a challenge. Policing is a very hard job. It's super hard. You see death, you see destruction. You're the garbage men of society, and you see, or garbage men and women, forgive me, of society. So you see these things, and so what I would like to see is people get behind a platform to say, okay, here is how we reform, not defund, maybe not defund, but refund. We reallocate funds here. We do that. Get behind a platform to say, okay, yeah, training is good, but how about let's get these guys psychologically evaluated every 3 years, because they got a tough job, and let's make sure that they're fit for not just duty, but fit to be for their families and fit for those types of things. So that's one of the things that I would suggest, is getting behind that. As far as the, I don't know, this was hard for me, and I got to share this with you guys really quickly. I went to one of those protests, and I passed out water in the Macomb protest with my family. It was a cool experience. It was beautiful, peaceful, everything. And one of the things that was really a challenge for me, I was so angry. This infuriated me personally. Is that if you're familiar with the CVS, you guys, right at the corner of Hayes and Hall Road, that CVS, if you guys are familiar with it, in Macomb County, there were a number of businesses that were on that corner. And yeah, the coronavirus is, or that are just a little bit west of that corner. There's a Firehouse Sub. There's also some other businesses that are Chinese Panda Express is what it is. Some other things, restaurants and stuff that were there. And the day of the protest, they all closed early. So here's, or if they were open at all. For me, it's a Saturday afternoon. You got these peaceful protesters who are walking down the street, but you say you support the Black Lives Matter movement, but corporate or whomever decides to close their doors because they're so, Partridge Creek, what's the name of that nice restaurant? Cooper's Hawk was boarded up. I mean, that's more of the bias and perpetuation. Oh, black people are just prone to violence, so we got to board this up. There were more white people than were black people out at that protest. Nobody tore up nothing. You say you support, but you close your business. That's an opportunity to pass out water, pass out flyers, show your support. Maybe people want to come. I wanted to go eat. I wanted to go into Jersey Mike's and eat with my family. We wanted to make a family thing. We couldn't even go eat because they were closed. And we went to the other Jersey Mike's that's 2 miles east. They were closed too, nowhere near this. Partridge Creek Mall, they didn't even go to Partridge Creek Mall, but the mall was all boarded up. Some of those places, it's horrible. So
Kohl's was boarded up too at Lakeside Mall. Yeah, boarded up. Yeah.
I mean, they need to board up the whole malls where the businesses did out there. Just want to shut everything down. You save some money. Anyway, that's a whole nother thing. But I mean, so Diane, I don't know if that answers your question. When you have organizations, if you truly show your support, be supportive. And if you don't want your business open or come out, pass out water. It's marketing. It's all those things. So I don't know if that kind of answered the question or responded, but those are things that can be done to really show support and really help out. Hi, Christina. So anyway, sorry. Okay, that was me. I'm sorry, Wendy. I was long with that. I tried to be short.
Fine, you answered that perfectly. I will just add to the, you know, when these huge companies were speaking about changing Aunt Jemima and changing Uncle Ben, et cetera, I had a few people ask me what was my take on that. And I literally had the exact same reaction that Darnell expressed earlier. Me walking into a Kroger and seeing these products on the shelf is not directly harming me or my children. However, the money that you are profiting off using these spaces and marketing them and not donating and putting that back into the Black community is what's hurting. So policy change is what we need, and support of policy, and that comes with money, and we all know that. So what I would have really preferred those companies to say was, over X amount of years, we've made X amount of $1 billion off of Aunt Jemima's face. As a result, we're going to take this percentage and we're going to put it towards, whether it's police reform, whether it's COVID initiatives in the Black community, sports in the Black community for the underprivileged who don't have access to sports because the schools are closed, or laptops to the public schools in the inner cities who can't have remote learning like the rest of our children. So that's what I want to see. Action. My kids go to a school in the burbs here, and I'm in conversations with their administrators about action-based initiatives. Talk is all good, but you put some action behind it. And so that's essentially what we would employ on any business who really is aligning themselves with the Black Lives Movement. And when I say the Black Lives Movement, I mean challenging the status quo, fighting inequities, making sure that systemic racism is something we're working to eliminate. So that's what we mean when we say the Black Lives Movement. For so long, as many have mentioned, it's just been stigmatized to be something not nice. And that's hurtful, because I want my kids to be proud to be Black. I want them to say Black Lives Matter and be okay with that and not offend anyone else who's not Black. Doesn't mean they don't care about their friend who's not Black. It just means that they value their lives. And I think that it's important for us to keep pushing that into our kids because of everything I shared with you that we have to go through that you guys don't. It's important for our kids to know that they matter, because there's so many things in society that are telling them consciously or subconsciously that they don't matter. So that's all I would add to that.
Okay, well, it is 4:30, so I want to be very respectful of your time. I want to thank Darnell and Wendy for your honesty and for sharing, and some of the takeaways with the difference between implicit bias and unconscious bias, and Wendy, the examples you showed or shared in real life situations you shared, and the fact that we need to acknowledge the problem before we can even work on it, and we need to educate ourselves. And Wendy, I look forward to getting some books and resources that we can share. And maybe, I don't know, maybe if anyone's interested in doing a little book club or something, we can do that on the side. And I think definitely continue the conversation. I don't think this is something we just do one time and say, okay, we've crossed that off our list and we've made a difference now. Black Lives Matter, yay us. No, I think it's something that needs to continue going on and getting stronger. And like you say, Darnell, we must be the change. So the only way we're going to do that is if we continue the dialogue and start working towards some solutions. So maybe we can schedule and do something again. And thank you all, and have a lovely, lovely evening tonight, okay?
Thank you
before we go, Karen?
Thanks.
Yeah, I want to say thank you and tell you I got a huge unconscious and implicit bias against that horrible sign that John has in the background. Nobody knows. This is just why? Can you mute him? Can we cut his picture off or something? This is killing me. Thank you. Go breathe.
Love you, buddy. Love you.
Okay,
of course you do. Love you too, man.
Thank you, Wendy.
You killing me, Small. You're
Take care.
Kill me.
Bye-bye.
Hey, everybody stay safe.
You too. Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.